I just wanted to introduce Bob. Bob is also really nice about coming on and giving us some really awesome presentations, really thinking differently for me. I just love the ideas that he brings to the table and, lets us see things in a different light. So with that, we'll welcome Bob. Thank you.
Well, thanks again for having me. And of course, thanks for the honorary membership. Happy to be an honorary an honorary member. And someday I hope to actually be sitting there with you. So I'll try to take even better advantage of that membership when I can. So pictures look good. Everybody hear me okay while I'm going here? Yep.
Yeah.
All right, great. All right, so as you heard, I often bring unusual or different topics to the table, and I think this is going to be one that I don't think anybody has talked about or thought about before, and I'll get into it. But first, you're going to get a bonus because I'll throw in a couple other things first. I just finished a week-long road trip down to some places, and I can just give you a few little hints about what I did there too. I started up in Andover, Mass, and ended up down in Colonial Williamsburg, and I'll tell you about those stops there and back because they're horology related, and they may be places you all want to hit if you haven't already. The first stop was the Frick Museum in New York City, which has just reopened after a several $100 million renovation. It was a house museum, and I'm going to be writing for Antiquarian Horology an article about them. I hope some of you are members of the Antiquarian Horological Society in England, which I'm a member of and I write for pretty often. In this issue, that's my photo on the top because I wrote about my visit to trips to horological museums in Japan. And I'd be happy to tell you about that in another presentation sometime too. But what you see there, that sculpture, is actually a pile of melted watches from the great earthquake and fire in Tokyo in the 1920s, where a watch manufacturing and repair shop was burnt to the ground. And when they started digging around, this is what they found happened to a lot of the pocket watches that were in there for repair. They all kind of melted together. But this is a view of one of the museum cabinets in Tokyo that I visited and wrote an article about that for. So that article is available on my website. And again, happy to give a talk about that sometime about Japanese horology, which probably a lot of you know is quite different from the way we told time and what the clocks looked like in the past. So at the Frick, they got a great collection of clocks about 25 years ago, and they've only exhibited them sporadically until now because their renovation allowed them to open up some extra exhibit space upstairs. This is the curator who came to them from Versailles. She was the decorative arts curator at Versailles in France. She's been at the Frick a couple of years now, and they have a small but unbelievably valuable and important collection, principally of early French Renaissance clocks. So I'll be writing about that and talking about them. The next stop was at Winterthur. You probably know of that as one of the most important house museums in the country, huge collection of American decorative arts. And I spoke at their archive about my book. I hope some of you own this book, and if not, you will want to own it. But I used several things from the Winterthur archive in this book, including this account book from the 1760s that belonged to Benjamin Randolph, a Philadelphia cabinet maker. And as you see there at the bottom, Edward Duffield received a little over £1 from Randolph. We don't know why, but we see Edward Duffield's signature down at the bottom confirming this financial exchange. Some of you may remember or even attended the first symposium that I organized as symposium committee chairman was at Winterthur in 2016. There's still a website that I keep active that's all about that event. You can see recordings of the speakers and everything at that time. So it was good to be back there. They certainly remembered that I organized a great conference there about their clocks, of which there are more than 100. This is their exhibit gallery that's a part of it. And as you can see, they have many clocks there on display front and center when you walk in are these two Claggett clocks, which greet you and they tell you a lot about them as soon as you get into that gallery. They also have the Domini era workshop, one of the only known clockmaker workshops still left from that time period. And one of the things they have on display is this great wheel cutting engine. So there's technical things there, and as well as a lot of other tools to view there. Then we swung down to Colonial Williamsburg. And as you see, they do have one of the buildings there is a recreation of a jeweler shop, and you see that he also was a watchmaker at the same time. They have a fantastic gallery of clocks, and including clocks are in other parts of their galleries as well. But they have this incredible keeping time exhibit with many, many clocks. And as you see on the right, they have some where you can view the movements. They have great graphics, great information about them. So if you haven't been to Colonial Williamsburg recently, you haven't seen this fantastic clocks gallery that's there. And of course, one reason I went there is they own this beautiful Edward Duffield clock that's in my book, featured in my book. This is in a whole different section, not even in that clocks exhibit. And as you see, this is one of the few Duffield clocks that has that spherical moon lunar indicator, not just the typical flat disc. So that's really an extra special Duffield clock in their collection. We went to Charlottesville too, to Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home that you see there with all the beautiful flowers and grounds, and on a nice sunny day down there. And you probably recall that there's that great Henry Voigt clock that Jefferson commissioned and in part designed, that's in the entrance foyer of Monticello, and that interesting system of the weight going off to the side. And when the weight is higher up, it aligns with the days of the week. So you could look over on the wall and see what day it was. And the weight descends right into the basement, and there's a underneath there, and there are those lines continue there down there to show you Saturday and Sunday down there before the clock has to be rewound. And this is another great regulator that was commissioned by Jefferson from Voigt, and that stands in one of the rooms in Monticello. We then on the way went to Charlottesville, and of course this is one of Thomas Jefferson's things that he's most proud of is his establishing the University of Virginia and this rotunda building that he designed in the neoclassical style. And there's the clock up above in the pediment. Simon Willard visited Jefferson, visited Monticello, and was commissioned to make the clock in the rotunda there. The last stop was Shepherdstown, West Virginia, where we have friends. And this is a great tower clock that they have there. It has a very unusual advanced escapement with a movement with a gravity escapement. And they also have a great little museum there with several examples of locally made tall clocks, including 3 by the fellow right there in Shepherdstown, Jacob Craft. So they have some good local clocks there in there. So let's now get busy with the topic at hand there. This is the Barrington Center for the Arts, which is there at Gordon College in Wenham, Massachusetts, in the North Shore near Cape Ann. This is a Christian school, so they were particularly interested in the subject matter of this exhibit. The title of it, what does Greenwich have to do with Jerusalem, is a spin-off of this second century philosopher who converted to Christianity, Tertullian. He posed the question of what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem, because he was considering what the connections were between Christianity and the world, the classical world of Rome and Athens. So we took this concept one step further and tried to note the connections, many going back centuries, as you'll hear, between Christianity particularly and horology. So this is the opening page of the catalog. This catalog is available in print. We printed up a lot of them, and I'll probably have some with me at the National Convention to show people. But this is showing kind of the two curator statements. Damon DiMauro, who you'll see in a minute, who is my collaborator. He's a professor there at Gordon College, as well as in charge of their incredible rare book collection that they have there. So if you see just in red, I'm not going to read from the screen constantly, but this sort of summarizes, as you see Damon wrote there, the relationship of timekeeping to the Christian faith. Mechanical clock, you probably know this, has its origin in monasteries used to awaken the community for nocturnal prayer. Subsequently became a powerful metaphor for the orderliness of pious living, and indeed God himself came to be characterized as the master clockmaker. You can read more of that. And in my section down below, I note how, and I think you know about this, my big collection of horology and art images, and many of them have religious content in them. So those were the ones that were selected. So both Damon and I lent both clocks and artworks to this groundbreaking exhibit. As far as we know, there has never been an exhibit or a symposium, as you'll hear about, specifically on the subject of the many centuries of connections between horology and religion, particularly Christian religion. So here's they have a beautiful art gallery space, a modern building. Here's the title is on the wall. You see it ran almost 2 months there with the main gallery on the left and a little smaller gallery on the right that I'll talk about. This is me and Damon DiMauro. Again, you've probably seen several of his articles in the bulletin. He's the guy who's co-writing our next book, which is about the Mulligan family of clockmakers. So there we are, and I see I have my Worshipful Company of Clockmakers pin and tie on, since I'm a member of that 1631 guild in London, so I like to wear that special tie when I can. So this is a view of the opening reception, and I'll start talking about the things that you're seeing there. But we certainly a lot of the college students were interested in there. It's a college of about 1,200 members. Again, a Christian school there, not in the in the mode of the Jerry Falwell kinds of evangelical schools, but the school was founded as a Christian school, and that's why a lot of kids, a lot of students go there. So this is again another view of the gallery, and there's Damon talking to Dave Goss, who's a history professor there. Twice now I've gone to his history classes to speak about the history of horology. He loves having me there. His students seems to like it when I show up with clocks and a lot of images about the history of timekeeping and why every history student at that school should know about the history of timekeeping as well as about the American Revolution and every other thing that they're studying there. But take a look at the guy with the glasses on the left too. You'll see him again in a few minutes. That's Abe Antonelli, a student who's just graduated. So this is was kind of our signature piece. You saw it on the cover of the catalog. This is from a Botticelli fresco from the 1400s. This is on the wall of a church in Siena, and this is depicting St. Augustine. St. Augustine is kind of famous for saying, everybody knows what time is until you try to define it, and then you have trouble defining it. But this is an interesting image as well, because St. Augustine lived in the 3rd and 4th centuries, but yet Botticelli has put a clock on the wall in St. Augustine's study. So clocks like that, or any mechanical clocks, were not invented for another 1,100 years, but Botticelli put that clock in the image, and we think it's because the clock shows the time of the death of St. Jerome. And St. Jerome is who St. Augustine was thinking about at this moment that Botticelli is depicted. And as you're getting a sense here too, there's extensive wall panels describing all of these things, and the text of those wall panels and wall labels are all in the printed catalog, again, which I continue to have copies of if any of you want to see all that. So this is another one of our very early Renaissance era images. These are from books of hours that I'll mention in a minute. We're talking about, as you see, the origins of the mechanical clock, which originated in monasteries. And as Damon pointed out on that wall panel, even one of the most famous nursery rhyme songs, Frere Jacques, sort of applies to the notion that the monks in those monasteries needed to wake up to pray at specific times during the night. So this little song is making sure that Frere Jacques has awakened. But this is a wonderful image. This is actually King Solomon repairing a clock. So as you'll hear, clocks are sort of symbols of God and of God creating the universe, and a clock is sort of a metaphor for it. But you see King Solomon here has his tools here. We have some parts laying around there too as he's repairing this clock. And the people looking on are actually the people who commissioned this artwork, this book of hours. So they're the patrons of this book. And as you may know from Renaissance art, a lot of times the rich people that paid for these images get their faces into the artworks themselves. These were two others that we showed there. Of course, there's one on the left, a famous image of someone in heaven who's manipulating a clock. It's one of the earliest images of a weight-driven geared timekeeping device. So that's historic too. And on the right, we see, if you look closely, we see Temperance there, who actually is wearing one of the virtues, who has a clock as a hat. You see, she has a clock on her head. And that's really telling the story. It's a common image where everyone understood that clocks were symbols of discipline and punctuality and all that, and controlling your emotions. So the fact that this clock is on her head is kind of saying that in her mind she's quite disciplined, and she's actively sort of controlling herself and her emotions. And she's standing on a windmill. And windmills and wind are kind of metaphors for uncontrolled emotions and passions. So she's kind of standing on that, controlling those emotions and passions by kind of damping them down with her feet and body weight. And this is another quite famous one, as I underlined there on the label. There's actually 8 Renaissance era timekeepers pictured in this image. We see astrolabes, we see large geared clocks, and then even smaller clocks and a sundial there on the far right. So this is really a rich horological image, but clearly has some serious religious content as well from the woman, the haloed woman standing in the center. And again, as I mentioned, a lot of these images are from these books of hours that were used by, they were hand illustrated. It wasn't printed. These were manuscripts that were done in there, and rich people would buy them and use them as devotional aids as they went through the days. These were the hours. These were what were used to guide them for prayer during the hours of the day. So in this is a great page there. You see on the left, there's a clock hanging there in that wonderful, beautifully illustrated scene. This came up at Christie's, and as you see, if you'd had $100,000 or $200,000, you could have owned this yourself. I didn't circle back to see what this actually went for, since I wasn't going to be an active bidder no matter what. But there are reproductions of these books too, and a small number of the pages do show timekeepers within them. So this is another view, and you'll start to see some, and I'll start talking about some of the clocks that you see on the wall here. These 4 that you see there, the 3 tall clocks and the banjo clock on the right, are out of Damon's collection. Once he befriended me with some nascent interest in horology, with my advice and consultation and driving to auction houses, he's now begun accumulating a very important collection of early American clocks that I'll talk about. And I'll also talk about those pictures of clocks there in a minute too, that you'll see. So here's another view of the of the gallery. And what you see here not only are a pair of church clock hands that I bought some years ago at an outdoor antique show. Supposedly they're from a clock tower in Maine, probably with about a 6-foot dial, because that's the hand size there. You see the nice counterweighted hands. But below it is a 18th century posted iron frame clock that was in one of those church clock towers. So that's its connection again to religion. This was in a clock tower. Here's a close-up view of it, and we know the church it was in. We don't know the maker. It could be American or English from the mid-18th century, but it's certainly of that style, and it was in this church, which is a church in Newburyport, Massachusetts. So we know it came out of there. It ended up in a private collection. It's now on loan to a museum in Newburyport after it came out of that private collector's garage near me. So if we start looking through these clocks, we see here, this is the first one. This is a Samuel Mulligan. So this also relates to the book that I'm co-authoring with Damon. He wanted to own this. This is one of the earliest clocks we know of that the Mulligans produced. As you see, it has a single hand, and it was made in Bradford, which is part of Haverhill, Massachusetts, only about 10 miles from where I'm sitting today and talking to you. And you see those interesting pewter spandrels as well that were probably cast locally from the more typical brass spandrels that people would buy and apply to dials here in America. And those spandrels were cast and made in England. So there's a view of the next clock. This is by a Quaker clockmaker. You see it's by Ebenezer Sargent. Damon talks at length about the connections between Quakerism and clockmaking. This was one of the skilled crafts that Quakers got into, and they created a whole network of supplying each other and selling to each other. And of course, Quakers had a reputation for being both artisans of high quality and of being very honest. They didn't barter. That would indicate that they were asking too much originally. So people really trusted both their artisanship and their financial dealings with that. So this is again an example of one of those wall panels that's also in the catalog. So where Damon's talking about Ebenezer Sargent. So what you see here first is his exposition about Sargent, and he's noting that there are sort of religious connotations even in the design of these clocks, the tombstone dials, tombstone doors, and you see those spandrels have these sort of spiritual connotations of faces surrounding by vegetation, and those dolphins that you also often see in those spandrels. Those are understood to be symbols of salvation and hope. So with each of those panels, then there's the actual description of the clocks down below that you see there, which talks again about Ebenezer Sargent. So this is Moses Peck, his next clock. And Moses Peck was a very important clockmaker, well known in the Boston area. And Moses Peck led the procession of clock and watchmakers in 1789 when George Washington visited Boston. Paul Revere organized this procession of all the trades in Boston at the time when George Washington was making his tour of America after he was elected president in order to promote the adoption of the Constitution. So all these crafts marched by Washington. The poor guy had to stand there in the rain for about 12 hours, supposedly, as all these tradesmen walked by. But Moses Peck was selected to be the head of the clock and watchmakers, number 9 there, as they paraded past the president and war hero. So there's a closer look at the Moses Peck, and he also was a founder of the school that became Dartmouth College and was quite active and supportive of missionary efforts at that time. There's again a much closer image of the Moses Peck Boston dial. So the fourth Damon clock is this banjo clock by Edmund Currier. As you see, he was a very active Baptist as well. He was a deacon of his church church, and also quite a famous clockmaker. He eventually moved to Salem, Mass., but he was well known, as you see I've underlined in red there too, for working extremely long hours, 16 hours a day, no idleness, and even in the winter you'd see him at work first thing in the morning by lamplight. And there's a kind of nice example of a Courier Salem banjo clock. This is my Simon Willard tall clock. So Simon Willard was, as we know, active in Grafton and then in Boston. There's a closer look of it. Damon pointed out on the, just as barely seen there on the bottom, is a funerary urn surrounded by vegetation that clearly has spiritual connotations. And most of the craftsmen, including the Willards, who worked in the Roxbury section of Boston, all went to the same church. That was part of their village and their community. And you see this nice image of Roxbury back then with the church that they all attended there on the hillside. This is, again, a closer view of the Simon Willard clock. And another clock of mine there is my Edward Duffield tall clock. This is one that I bought at the time I was working on my book. And during the one of the events there, the symposium that I'll mention in a minute, this is Tom Manning, who you may know is the curator of the museum in Bristol, the American Clock and Watch Museum, and Brendan Sullivan, also from that area, who formerly was the head of the board of the Bristol Museum. So they came up, as did many other people. We had a full house for that symposium, but it was great that that Tom Manning came along too. Probably one of the most knowledgeable guys about Connecticut clockmaking that's around today. There's another view of my Duffield clock, and you see a little image of Christ Church there. And here's a modern view of the church that I took not too long ago. That's important because Edward Duffield was not only a clockmaker, as you may know from my book, he was a major, affluent, rich citizen, and he was both a warden and a vestryman of Christ Church. This was the church that George and Martha Washington went to, that John Adams, James Monroe went to when they were, James Madison went to when they were in the city. So it was sort of the mother church of the Anglicans and Episcopal Church in America at that time. This is a folk art painting that expands on the memento mori theme of how a lot of artworks up to the present day really have reminders in them of how of human mortality and how our life here on Earth is fleeting. And some of these paintings, which I believe like this one, are actually posthumous paintings where they would paint in images of people who had moved on to the next world. I wanted this painting badly because, as you see, the woman, the mother, is holding a pocket watch, and it's being held by a black ribbon. She's dressed in black. It's sort of it's a symbol, probably correct, that that infant had died. But this was a portrait memorializing her. So memento mori images are common in Renaissance and later paintings, where they not only would remind us with symbols of human mortality, but sometimes show people who were no longer with us. This is a Nathaniel Mulliken tall clock, and again, Nathaniel II. So there were two of them, both working in Lexington. There's a close-up of the dial, Lexington, and even a closer picture of it. You see with very ornate silver dial and cast brass spandrels from the period. A great imagery there in the seconds dial as well. Nathaniel Mulliken's shop was on Lexington Green, and it was there on April 19th when the shots were fired that were heard around the world. This is one of the famous Doolittle prints, which fairly accurately depict the events of that historic day. They were just recreations of that because this is the 250th anniversary of the 1775 battles of Lexington and Concord. So one of those buildings there is the home and shop of Nathaniel Mulliken II. And as the British were leaving town, they set fire to 3 of those buildings, including the one at the center that was Mulligan's home and shop. So his house was burned down. He no longer made clocks. And in fact, the next year, as a member of the colonial army surrounding Boston and a member of the militia, he died from camp fever. So, which was something far more colonial soldiers died of illness like that than they ever did from British cannon fire and musket balls. But there's a great image of the Mulligan shop being burnt to the ground as the British were leaving. Partly it was in retribution for them being fired on, and partly is because they were still thinking that there were colonial militiamen inside those buildings who were shooting at them. So they wanted to eliminate that possibility. Another display in the exhibit was Wallace Nutting. You're probably all familiar with his prints. You may not recall that Wallace Nutting was a congregational minister, trained minister. He eventually had a nervous breakdown. He really railed against modernity in a lot of ways. And then he kind of stumbled upon this whole business of making these hand-painted photographs, most of them of colonial American scenes, to try to revive our feelings about the importance of colonial America and its values at that time. So this is a collection of mine I'm accumulated of these Wallace Nutting scenes. Of course, we know that he also produced this early and important reference book on American clockmaking, which really people still use, but was almost the Bible of clock collectors for many years since the 1920s when he published it. And here's just a couple of examples of people in period dress. So Wallace Nutting owned several historic homes, which he fitted out as sites and scenes for these historic photographs that he would kind of create. And often they have these banjo clocks on the wall. They aren't always historically accurate, but they're interesting, and probably almost every house in America had a Wallace Nutting print on its walls at some point. There's a second one too, showing a banjo, and you see this is kind of unusual because the banjo clock's standing on the mantle, not hanging on the wall, but that was done. I've certainly seen other examples of that. Another display was of William Hogarth, a 18th century English artist and printmaker, showing the 4 times of the day. So this certainly is horological because he's depicting London scenes from morning, noon, evening, and night. And the one that's particularly relevant is this one, which is his depiction of noon, because this is not only showing an English church in the background with noon on its dial, but these are Huguenots who had fled from France because of the expulsion of the Protestants from France. Many of them came to England, and this is the Huguenot church that they're all leaving at noon, I suppose, on a Sunday. But as you see, Hogarth is doing his usual thing of showing all kinds of city life at the time. And we know that the Huguenots were very important to British horology. The first guy that applied Huygens pendulums to clocks in England was Fromentil, who was based in London and who was a Huguenot expatriate who was again fleeing the persecution on the continent, and he came. But many other Huguenots became important English clockmakers in London at that time. Another display here, you'll see some watches I'll talk about in a minute and a chronometer, but I also had this 1920s Longines watch poster showing Father Time there with wings holding it up. So there's a great image of a winged figure advertising Longines watches. In that case was my chronometer by William Bond of Boston, and also a selection of pocket watches show both American and European at the time. And again, some, if they were Swiss, there were close connections between Huguenot and Protestant makers in Geneva, as well as others. Oh, there's my Simon Willard striking, if you're hearing that. So we know we're up to 11 o'clock now. You saw an image of these before. These are actually printed enlargements I made of lantern slides. The Congregational Archive and Library in Boston was just given a collection of about 400 lantern slides from about 125 years ago, where somebody there documented every Congregational church in Connecticut. And I went through all of those and I found about 60 of them where the churches had clocks in the steeples. So you see there's a selection of them there. Most, again, about 80% of those clock towers didn't have clocks in them. But the ones that did were identified, and I took those lantern slides and made large prints out of them. This is an example of a lantern slide. Probably you know what these are, these little kind of 3x4 glass positive transparencies. This is a great one that I had in my case there because this is a Matthew Brady image. And you might remember that I also have done articles and talks about Matthew Brady's clock. He was a famous Civil War era photographer, and he had this mantle clock, the Reaper model, in his studio where people could decide they want to be depicted with this Reaper model clock. But this guy is famous too. This guy's name is Boston Corbett. He was among the Union troops that were trying to find Booth, the assassin of Abraham Lincoln. His company found Booth hiding in a barn in Virginia, and Boston Corbett is the guy that shot and killed John Wilkes Booth. So he was he was a strange guy, mentally ill, as it turns out. Extremely religious. He would stand on street corners preaching and quoting the Bible, but again was most famous for shooting Lincoln's assassin. As I mentioned, Damon is the caretaker really of the 7,000 volume rare book collection at Gordon College, the Vining collection, and they have some incredible books there, including a first edition of the St. James Bible that you see in the case here, as well as on the right there, a Bible in German by Christopher Sauer. This was only the second Bible printed in America. The British did not allow us to print Bibles in English. The first Bible was the famous Eliot Bible that was translated into a Native American language and printed in Boston. This is the second one, printed in 1743 by Christopher Sauer in the German language. And the fun thing about Christopher Sauer, not only was he a printer, but he was a clockmaker. Here's a description of the Sauer Bible that again, you'll see this in the catalog. Took him 3 years to set the type. Everything had to be hand set, printed one sheet at a time. Only printed 1,200 copies. Also an ink maker, so there's plenty to learn about Christopher Sauer as a Bible printer, but he also was a clockmaker, and there are several examples of clocks that he made in colonial Philadelphia, including this example that has that nice kind of penny moon lunar indicator. This stands in the Library Company of Philadelphia building in Philadelphia. So Christopher Sauer clocks are interesting and important from the early history of Philadelphia. So not only did we have that big gallery space, but there's a smaller gallery adjacent to it that you might remember seeing that we called the maker space, because this wouldn't have necessarily a lot of connections to religion, but this would be more about the craft of clockmaking and watchmaking. So this is a longer view. You see, I happen to have a Sly modern grandfather clock here that I had temporarily, as well as a watchmaker's bench and other things on display. One reason I wanted a modern chiming grandfather clock is because we had it chiming all of these church melodies from churches in England. You know, we all know Westminster, you know, but St. Michael's and Whittington all play melodies that echo the melodies in churches in England. Westminster originally was Cambridge chimes. It got kind of taken over by the tower at Westminster, but we had these chimes playing every 15 minutes during the whole time that the exhibit was up, to kind of remind people of those connections as well. With Westminster chimes, you probably know, actually has words. You know, it's a prayer. So I had a case of watchmaking tools there as well that people could examine, as well as a small display of watch and clock repair books that people could look at as they went through that room. And also plenty of free stuff. I love to give away stuff. I had a lot of old movements and parts, and as you see in my sign there, I wanted people to take them and play with them and start, connecting with horological materials. And by the end of the exhibit, that bucket was just about empty. So it worked. And as you see, I also was giving away back issues of bulletins. And I do this quite regularly. Whenever I have duplicates, whenever I do lectures or anything, I bring a stack, and mostly they disappear because people find them full of good information, as we all do. So again, this is Abe Antonelli, and he was there doing demonstrations of some simple clock servicing things when people came in. I brought in my watchmaker's lathe there, and Abe would do things. Again, he's just graduated, but Abe was an intern of mine. He actually got college credit for coming to my house once a week during last spring semester and learning clock repair. He had to write a paper out of it. He had to read books that I gave him about horology. But Abe is now graduated. He's getting his master's degree, but he also definitely plans to get into clock repair more and more seriously. And he wants to be a public school teacher. And we know that those folks have their summers off and weekends. And he thinks this could be a great additional revenue stream for him, as well as just something that he clearly has an aptitude and wants to do. So there's again another view of that table and tools. But if you look up at the top right, that's one of the clocks that I supplied to the exhibit. I also had an OG clock there with the dial off, and I had that running and striking so people could see how those worked. Had a couple other movements, including a wood movement and a staking set down there on the right side. But if you look at that clock, you'll see I have a patent drawing next to it. And I had many patent drawings, original patent drawings, on display. Here's a picture of that parade clock, as we call them. They're pretty rare. They were internally illuminated. They almost all have that crack in the dial from the heat of the candle inside, breaking the milk glass. Here's a view of it from the original catalog, showing this was a New Haven clock catalog, 1889, showing that clock. And as you may recall, it's even on the cover of this classic clock collector book that I'm sure a lot of you have on their shelves. But I was lucky enough to find and buy about 12 original patent drawings from the U.S. Patent Office. And if you see down below there, they had a little trouble getting this accepted. You see there were rejections on this by the patent examiner until finally the patent was accepted. And you see that this is a member of the Jerome family, one of Chauncey's sons, who did this design patent, submitted it, and eventually it was patented. You can see the patent number there. You can look those up online in the patent office and see these, but these are the original patent drawings. This is not a print. This is somebody who drew this as part of their patent application. And you can see the whole line of them that I had on display there. There's another example of a watch case. I'm not sure if any of these other ones were ever produced, but there's a design patent. If any of you have ever seen this bird form watch case, I'd love to hear about it. I looked up the designers too. You can find them. Frederick Rapp is somebody who did some other, and you see he had a rejection too before it was finally accepted. And here's one of the mechanical inventions. The other were design patents. These were mechanical designs, and this is just showing an index plate and nut that was being patented. So those are fabulous things, and luckily they weren't burnt up when the patent office caught fire, and they weren't thrown out. I was able to get them from a dealer who had gotten a big stack of these patent drawings, including horological ones. So during the time of our exhibit, we had a one-day symposium, again on a subject that I don't think anybody has talked about or or had an exhibit about before, and you see the names of my eminent speakers that are there. This was as we were all gathering that morning. There's Patrick Mont looking serious there on the left. He's on the AWCI board, works at Chelsea Clock Company. Several other people getting their refreshments before we sat down. And here's the speakers and curators who I'll just mention as we go along. You see them standing there with me and Damon, and a couple of the nice clocks on the wall, and a nice painting I own too of a tall clock in presentation. And there's one of our speakers. She teaches theology out at Wheaton College in Illinois. This was her subject, God's Time in Our Hands. Here she is speaking and showing some early Bibles. Sarah Schechner, who just retired from the Historical Scientific Instrument at Harvard College. There's its sign. There's a view of that collection there. She's the author of this great sundial book. She spoke about sundials on churches, dealing the many church fronts had sundials of the time, and there were watches that had built-in and sundials and watches that were in the shape of crucifixes. There's a early kind of tabernacle Renaissance era clock, kind of looks like a church, but you look there on the left, that watch actually has a built-in sundial as well. Dan Benson lives up in Toronto. He reviewed my book for the AWCI magazine. He spoke about Paley's watch. Will Andrews, organizer of the symposium, Longitude Symposium, spoke about these early timekeepers, including the first depiction of an hourglass. Here was our symposium panel at a panel discussion. These guys had some time afterwards to look at it. Some poetry students at the school came and were inspired to write poetry. And I hope that I see a lot of you in York in a couple of weeks at the NAWCC convention there. So I hope this inspired you to think about the connection between horology and religion. Again, the printed catalog is available from me if you'd like it. And any of these images that appeal to you, I'd be happy to share with you as well. Hope this was interesting and educational for you.
When you're dealing with some of the older cases or older clocks, like your colleague who had the 4 clocks in the museum, and your Simon Willard clock, and you're looking at these pieces and they're 200 years old and they're colonial pieces, how do you approach them and say to yourself, well, this is a clock worth really having, but then it'd be 200 years old, and how do you judge the provenance of the case, I'm asking, so that it fits what you think is important without having someone having gone through and done lots of things to it over the years?
Well, fortunately, there are people even more educated than I am about this, and probably the most famous one, who you all know, is Robert Cheney, who's the executive director and curator of the Willard House Museum in Grafton. And I bought my Simon Willard clock at a Skinner auction in Massachusetts at the time when he was the clock specialist at Skinner. So he cataloged the clock and we talked about it and all too. So I think, and this clock also, the movement of it, I brought to that Clocks at Winterthur Symposium in 2016, and Richard Ketchen, who is probably the most skilled and perhaps one of the best known restorers of early clocks, he was one of my speakers, and he used my Simon Willard clock as an example of the kinds of clocks that we should be interested in, are important, and it was in, nice original condition. So, it's obviously none of us are 250 years old, but you can make certain assumptions from looking at the cases and all. And if you rely on people that know even more than we do, you're right in that there are many times more clocks that say Willard on them than were made by the Willards. So, he was probably one of the most faked clockmakers, even at the time he was alive, up until now. So those are, certainly issues that make it tricky to own Willard clocks. But, I feel pretty confident that that mine's okay. I hope I've answered the question that you asked. Yeah.
Yes, I found it. That was a wonderful answer. Anybody else? All righty then. Well, thank you for being our speaker this morning again.
Great. Thanks very much. Happy to do it. And as you know, I'm always happy to do it. I got a lot more talks in the can for whenever you're ready.
Thank you.
Okay.